Hi, this is Paul, and I want to do a video on Jordan Peterson and belief in God. Now, Jordan's answer to this has been very interesting, and everybody's noticed Jordan's answer to this, and he keeps giving the same answer, and we've talked quite a bit about it, but there's more to get into with respect to this, especially with respect to John Vervaake's meaning crisis, his videos that he's doing, and a ton of old stuff. So why keep asking Jordan Peterson about his take on the existence of God, and why does Jordan Peterson keep giving the answer he gives? Now, one of the best versions of this interchange happened on Firing Line with Margaret Hoover. And so here it is. Let's listen to how it unfolds. And some of you have seen this before. Video's been out a little while. And if my computer will cooperate, we'll pull it up.
I want to ask you about your personal faith. Christians who watch you have listened closely over the last 2 years about whether you self-identify as a Christian or not. Mm-hmm. And the National Review has, which was also the publication that William F. Buckley founded, has written about you the following: that the effect is that the intellectual idol of millions of people is punting on the most important question in the world. It is a question of literal metaphysical truth before this question of psychology. Peterson has said that he behaves as if God exists, but he lectures as if he doesn't.
Pay attention to literal metaphorical truth in the question by Liam Warner of the National Review.
It would be helpful for his fans and himself if he addressed the heart of the West crisis and meaning, God, yes or no. Why not take on this question of the existence of God?
Because it's not something to reduce to a soundbite, fundamentally.
But your lectures are 2 hours long.
This is true, but when you're talking about the most important questions that people have ever asked, then 2 hours isn't very long. Apparently, people will watch them. So I'm not prepared to say things in any other way than I've already said them. You know, it isn't obvious what belief means. People think that what they believe is what they say they believe. I don't believe that. I believe that
No, what's interesting about this interchange is watch how many times he himself uses the word belief in this process, because he clearly isn't afraid to use the term. So back it up a little bit.
It isn't obvious what belief means. People think that what they believe is what they say they believe. I don't believe that. I believe that what people believe is what they act out. And so I said, I act as if God exists. That's a sufficient statement as far as I'm concerned. You know, what's the old saying? By their fruits ye shall know them.
The old saying by Jesus.
Same idea, right? It's a matter of action and a matter of commitment. It's not a matter of me parading out my explicit statements about a metaphysical reality that's virtually impossible to comprehend. You risk when you reduce, and I'm not willing to do that, and I'm not interested in providing people with easy answers, including me. So
there's a question of whether you're working it out yourself.
Of course.
Yeah.
And everyone who's honest is working it out themselves. None of us have incontrovertible knowledge about what transcends our understanding. You know, like, I certainly do think I've learned things. I've learned that the deeper I go into the biblical stories and into religious mythology in general, cross-culturally, the less I see any bottom. You can go into it forever. And I've learned an immense amount doing that, and much of it has transformed my life. So, and I also believe that the West is grounded on the metaphysical presupposition that human beings have a spark of the divine in them. And I don't think there's a truer way of saying that. And I also believe that it's true. Now, what that means with regards to the ultimate metaphysical realities that ground the entire world, I dare not say, because I don't know. So I tend to try to say what I know and to leave the rest alone. And there's plenty I don't know and plenty I can't talk about. So, but I'm talking about what I can. I'm not interested in joining a club, regardless of what the club is. So I'm not going to make statements of reflecting a certainty that I don't have. So
What is your...
So there. And that's the answer. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this, and I want to use Paul Maxwell's wonderful little video, How Any Idiot Can Memorize the Entire History of Philosophy, which I think is a terrific title. I think it's a terrific video, and I just had a little interchange with Paul, and I hope to probably do a talk with him at some point. He's no longer making videos. He's doing something else, but I thought this was a great video, and a number of you have seen it and commented to me about it. And I think the way he begins here is really helpful in terms of understanding and locating what Jordan Peterson is and isn't doing. So let's listen to Paul a little bit here.
And even after teaching philosophy at a college level for years, I'm still kind of insecure about my philosophical knowledge. But one thing that has...
And everyone should be, because the philosophy and knowing it all is really hard. And so we just kind of scratch the surface.
I always succeeded in making sense of very unknown figures in philosophy is my basic conception of the story of philosophy. And it is a very simple story and can be explained without footnotes or block quotes. And if you can memorize this simple story, which is constituted basically by 6 words, you will be able to locate and sort of plug and play any unknown or obscure philosopher. Now, there are 3 fundamental categories of philosophy, which are these categories, and they constitute 6 of the essential words that you need to understand basically the entire story of philosophy. And these categories are this: metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Now, what are these words? Every single philosophical concept falls within these 3 domains, or somehow relates these 3 words to one another. So, metaphysics is the study of ultimate reality. So if physics studies what is true of the material world, then metaphysics is a way of describing the immaterial world, which gives shape and order to the material world. So for example, the claim that the soul exists is a metaphysical claim. And more basically, the claim that the world exists according to the laws of logic, that's a metaphysical claim. Metaphysics is the study of ultimate reality. So it explains not merely the material, but the conditions in which a material world could exist. So that's metaphysics. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Epistemology is the study of what we can know, how we can know things, and right and wrong ways of knowing. So for example, logic and evidence are 2 kinds of epistemology. If you combine them together, you get the scientific method. So the charge, if someone says to you, you're being irrational, that's an epistemological accusation. So atheism is a metaphysical claim, right? God doesn't exist. Whereas agnosticism it's an epistemological claim, which is that we can't know that God exists.
Now, pay attention to Jordan Peterson's answer in this frame, because I think Paul framed it really nicely. So you have metaphysics, and generally speaking, in the modern frame, people shy away from metaphysics, and we're skeptical about metaphysics. We can't know metaphysics. And when I categorize Jordan Peterson as an open agnostic, it's in this conceptualization. He's agnostic about metaphysics. He's open to it. He likes discussing it when you get him in the right mood and don't get too personal. But he's an open agnostic. That's an epistemological frame of reference, rather than an atheist who is actually making a sort of positive, negative claim about the existence of God. Jordan Peterson does not identify as an atheist. I think he's best characterized as an open agnostic. And so here you've got metaphysics, you've got epistemology, and now the third category he's going to go into.
Okay, so that's how you kind of slice the pie between metaphysics and epistemology with reference to the question of God. So metaphysics is ultimate reality, epistemology is the study of knowledge, axiology is the study of value. So within axiology falls subdisciplines like aesthetics, which is the study of beauty and ugliness, and ethics, which is the study of right and wrong. And unlike metaphysics and epistemology, which are black and white categories, axiological realities can be measured in degree. So a metaphysical claim, such as the claim the soul exists, is either true or it's not. The epistemological claim, you have committed a logical fallacy, is either true or it's not. Whereas the axiological claim, this painting is beautiful, or you should have done better, are statements of relativity and statements of degree. So every single philosophical idea is either metaphysical, epistemological, or axiological, or relates those 3 somehow. So those are the first 3 words: metaphysics, the study of ultimate reality; epistemology, the study of how we know what we know, the study of knowledge; and axiology, the study of value.
Now the axiology and what he talked about in terms of relativity, that's going to come into play when we get all the way down to Vervaeke's video. That's coming in a little while, but just kind of, and as Sam Harris says, put a flag in that.
Including aesthetics, which is the study of beauty and ugliness, and ethics, which is the study of right and wrong. Now, the second set of three words, which constitutes the six basic words of the story of philosophy, are pre-modernism, modernism, and postmodernism. And these are three ways of relating metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Pre-modernism begins all philosophical thought with metaphysical claims. That's what pre-modernism is. It's a kind of worldview. It's a category of worldview. So multiple worldviews would fall within pre-modernism. There are multiple pre-modern worldviews to believe. And epistemology was determined by the pre-moderns by the nature of metaphysical reality. So for example, the first philosophers, the pre-socratics, who came right before Socrates, pre-socratics, in the 7th and 6th century BC, they made very elemental claims about the world, like all is water, all is fire. And what they meant by statements like this was something metaphysical, right? They didn't mean that we're literally all on fire right now. What they meant was in the same way that fire is a flux, the whole world is a flux, and change is real, and order is an illusion, right? And the pre-Socratics were composed of basically two schools, the Eleatics and the Milesians. And the Milesians emphasized the disorder and the chaos of the world, and the Eleatics emphasized the orderliness and oneness of the world. So accordingly, the Milesians, because they saw the metaphysics of the world as chaotic, they emphasized sense experience as the proper epistemology, whereas the Eleatics emphasized the orderliness of the world, even to the point of rejecting that change was real at all. And they saw reason as the proper epistemology, as opposed to sense experience. So the Milesian philosophy emphasized change, or metabole was essentially what their philosophy was about. The world was in metabole, was in change. And the Eleatic philosophy emphasized unity, or logos, so metabole versus logos. And Socrates then came on the scene and taught the world to ask bigger, better questions about reality. So instead of asking, what is the right thing to do, a philosopher should ask, what is goodness? What is rightness? And in a sense, Socrates taught the world to think meta about realities, so to conceive of the immaterial realities behind our operational use of certain concepts. So Socrates pushed for conceptions of important realities that could be justified and universally applied without exception. So Socrates' student, Plato, took this notion of thinking meta and applied it to the entire world. His claim, kind of in line with the Eleatics, was that the material world was less real than the ideal world. In fact, it was the only world of ideas which was actually real.
See, now, if you've been following Vervaeke and some of the work that we've been doing there, now we've got the axial age. We've got the real, which world is real? And that's right here, that's going to be very important in terms of which world is most real, because you have the axial age, you have this split that Vervaeke keeps talking about, you have the world up there. Now, Peterson, okay, is Peterson speaking within an axial age reference when he talks about God? Well, for Peterson, philosophically, he, in a sense, I'm going to argue he's a modernist. He's arguing, when he's speaking as a psychologist, he is speaking with science, and he is making his arguments with respect to the things below. Now, in my conversations with Adam, who runs Think Club, Adam friended, Adam will continually remind me that Jordan Peterson is persuasive because he doesn't get into metaphysics. Because once you get into metaphysics, people will turn off because we can't know metaphysics. And there's a popular conception of this and a philosophical conception of the popular conception of this is we can't trust Revelation or the Bible or anything like that because we can't adjudicate it. And what we need to be able to adjudicate questions is science and reason. So science and reasons are our basis for knowledge. Metaphysics is unattainable. It's gone, so we stick down here. And so Jordan Peterson, when he's answered the question about God, Jordan Peterson basically says, I can't get to God what you mean by God, and what you're asking me about whether I believe in God, scientifically, it's unjustifiable, so I'm not going to go there. Now, I can have a personal belief, but I don't bring that out into the public square. That's a play very much of modernism, very much of secular governments, very much of this secular frame. And so when Jordan Peterson demurs, let's say, with respect to sharing for him what is private, he doesn't want his private beliefs monkeying around with what he's putting out there, which he feels is his public science. Science is for the public square. Private beliefs are for me and my friends at home. Again, this is standard practice in terms of what's been happening with respect to, that's the custom with respect to what's happening in the public square. You keep the private stuff private, the public stuff public. That's why Jordan Peterson keeps answering him the way he does. Now let's have Paul continue.
So the material world was just a shadow of the ideal world, since ideas are incorruptible and unchangeable and fixed, while the material world fades and disappears. And Plato called these ideas forms and defended the notion that we must access this world of forms through reason, through thinking of them, through conceiving of them in our minds, and that right reasoning was the necessary path to live in the real world. Plato's student Aristotle argued against Plato. So Aristotle argued that forms, or morphe, as Plato called them, using the Greek word morphe, forms don't exist in some separate reality, but they exist in the material things themselves. So in other words, the metaphysical world isn't just up there, it's actually down here. It's actually in the things. Things themselves are metaphysical rather than being the shadows of the metaphysical. So take, for example, the metaphysics of a human being. Is the substance of a human being, is it an abstract idea to which human beings conform? That a human needs to conform himself to through reason? Or is it an intrinsic potential that he needs to fulfill in order to be his best self? So Plato would say that the idea human being is a form to which humans should conform themselves, whereas Aristotle would say that a human being is a substance that contains both form and matter, which dictates proper action in order to fulfill its maximum potential.
Now, again, if you've been following the Vervaeke stuff, and actually Think Big Animation just did a really nice video on Plotinus. I got there first. I got to be first in the comment section on Think Big's Plotinus video. I was so excited. So, again, the stuff he's running through now in terms of Aristotle and Plato, this is all stuff that Vervaeke has been covering in his meaning crisis videos.
So, Aristotle's metaphysical shift changed the way he viewed ethics. So, acting ethically for Aristotle was not conceived in terms of conforming yourself to some abstract form of justice like Socrates and Plato argued. Instead, for Aristotle, ethics was conceived as a balanced expression of certain virtues which were inherently fitting to human nature. So, for example, take the act of facing danger, right? If you shy away from danger, you're a coward, which is a vice. But if you always rush headlong into danger without thinking tactically or strategically, well, that's foolishness too. But if you, so you have cowardice on one side and foolishness on the other side, or foolhardiness. But if you tactfully and strategically engage danger, not shying away or rushing in, that is a balance and therefore is a virtue. Okay, so it's not, so Aristotle, because he believed that metaphysics resided in the person, it was a different way of governing why people should act rightly. Rather than conforming yourself to an abstract idea, you fulfill what is right in a balanced way. And Christianity was heavily Platonic at its birth because the Platonic notions of abstract forms correlated well with the Judeo-Christian speech about like the incorruptibility of the divine essence and things like that. There was a happy marriage between neo-Platonism and Christianity. And Platonic language served the early Christology debates very well as it sought to articulate a balanced Christology. And it was through Augustine that Plato became the ruling architecture of Christian doctrine for the next millennium. In the same way that Plato really emphasized the oneness of the world, the order of the world, Augustine emphasized the oneness of the Trinity over the threeness of the Trinity, and so on and so forth. There were multiple other similarities. A millennium later, Aristotle made its way back into the West after his writings had been preserved by Islamism, actually. And philosopher Thomas Aquinas most popularly used Aristotle as a framework for articulating Christianity, and the sophistication of Aristotle's conception of substance, which we talked about earlier as being in the object rather than a form up there in the world, allowed Christian doctrine to exit the realm of abstraction and begin making more sophisticated formulations about the spirituality and materiality of Christianity, which is why Aristotle gave birth to a whole conversation about sacramentology, because you're really trying to account for the coexistence of the spiritual and the material in the same place, in the same substance, right?
Now pay attention. We're still dealing here in metaphysics. We're still in the ancient pre-modern phase where metaphysics is king, and we're talking about what is. We're talking about nouns, as it were, in a sense, and this is going to get complicated. But we're talking about what is, not so there's what is, what you can see, and what you can do. Now again, part of why I want to get into belief is not too long ago when I was taking a look at Maps of Meaning, a book that you should all be very familiar with by now, especially if you're a following node in a network who's going through it slowly. Subtitle, The Architecture of Belief. It's a very interesting subtitle given the author's coy posture with respect to belief in metaphysics. That's a very interesting thing. Yeah, I'm not criticizing here. I'm just saying there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. But let's let Paul go some more, because this is a wonderful little video that he does here.
So all of these philosophers have in common a pre-modern architecture, all the way from the pre-socratics through to Socrates, to Plato, to Aristotle, to the early church, and up to Thomas Aquinas. They are all pre-moderns because the first thing they do is posit the nature of the metaphysical world, and afterward, they ask how epistemology conforms to that metaphysics. Then we move from pre-modernism to modernism. Modernism prioritizes epistemology over metaphysics. This is called in history, this moment or this event in philosophical history is called the epistemic shift, because it changes from prioritizing metaphysics as the bottom to epistemology. Instead, it flips it, puts epistemology underneath and before metaphysics. And this epistemic shift is sometimes historically called the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment being defined as thinking for oneself rather than speculating about substances and forms. And modernism, in the form of the Enlightenment, is when philosophy really started thinking primarily about method, not so much about ultimate reality. So
now the Enlightenment, again, when you have this modern move where you say, basically it's a giving up on metaphysics and say, well, it's too hard. We're not gonna get there. And in the story that I've told in the past, there's lots of different elements to this story. One of the elements to this story is obviously the Protestant Reformation, and there was the turn toward text, and then the turn away from the text. And if you listen to Philip Carey's History of Religion and Philosophy in the West, you'll get more elements to story. And of course, Paul is giving you just a rapid run through of this history, but sometimes called the turn towards the subject, and epistemology then becomes the ground. And so when Jordan Peterson basically says, well, I can't answer the God question, well, I don't have enough time, she's like, yeah, your videos are 2 hours long. It's like, well, 2 hours isn't even enough. And because it's so we're going to start with epistemology. We're going to start with epistemology, and we're going to go from there.
This epistemic shift occurred first in the philosopher René Descartes in the 17th century, who doubted all metaphysical knowledge. He asked, what happens if we doubt everything? That's the only way we can be certain of anything, is to mercilessly prosecute and doubt every single thing. And then what's the end of this doubt? Well, a simple proof that even doubt is a thought, Descartes reasoned, that even doubt is a thought, which means that even if you doubt everything, you're still thinking, which means that the act of thinking can't be doubted. Therefore, the human mind exists at the foundation of doubt. And he uses logic to construct an entire philosophical edifice without any religious or metaphysical speculation of pre-modernism, right? So if the pre-moderns conceived the world in terms of the phrase, I am, which is a metaphysical claim, therefore, I think, which is thinking is an epistemological act. So the pre-modern conception of the human being would have said, I am, therefore I think. And it was Descartes who flipped everything through the epistemic shift, right? And he said instead, not I am, therefore I think, but I think, therefore I am, because thinking is the proof of itself. Then along comes David Hume, an 18th century philosopher, and he took Descartes' radical doubt to the next level. So he made an important distinction between impressions and ideas. Impressions are experiences of the world. So if I see an 8-ball on a pool table and that 8-ball makes an impression on my mind because I see it. So if I see a cue ball on that same table, that cue ball makes a separate impression on my mind. If I see someone hit the cue ball into the 8-ball and I witness the 8-ball move, Hume argues that I impose the idea of causality onto the relationship between the cue ball and the 8-ball. So in Hume's view, I am justified to believe that the cue ball and the 8-ball are real because they've made direct impressions on my mind. But I am not justified in saying that I know the cue ball caused the 8-ball to move, because causality isn't an object in the world, so it can't make an impression on my mind. And we're only justified in knowing, in our knowing of things which make impressions on our mind. Only impressed knowledge is certain knowledge, or can be certain knowledge. So Hume also classified morality as an idea.
Well, before we get there, that split is interesting, of course, because you've got the rationalist and the empiricist, which is going to talk about, because the certainty for Descartes is, I think, therefore I am. Well, there's certainty. Certainty for Hume is these objects. And again, now we're getting into the main fork at the beginning of Maps of Meaning, the world conceived of as a space of objects, and the world conceived of as a forum for action. Now, obviously, a forum for action is going to be quite a bit more psychological, and we've talked about that quite a bit. But notice here, before we get too far away from David Hume, that this impression and the objects and all of this, that's already coming into play here.
Yeah, rather than an impression. And infamously declared, is doesn't entail ought. You can't get from is to ought. You can't get from metaphysics to ethics. You just can't do it. There's no metaphysical claim that entails a certain ethical action. So in other words, you can't deduce any binding moral concepts from the bare material world. And Descartes' philosophy is called rationalism because he builds an entire worldview based on a modernist conception of reason, meaning that reason as a way of knowing is the foundation of all justified knowledge. Hume's philosophy is called empiricism, not rationalism, empiricism, because he builds an entire worldview based on a modernist conception of experience, meaning that
as the basis of all justified, keep paying attention to justified belief through all of this, okay?
Experience as a way of knowing is the foundation of all justified knowledge. Then comes in a philosopher named Immanuel Kant, several decades after Hume.
Okay, before we get to Kant, so justified knowledge, that's vitally important here, because again, when you go to Jordan Peterson's question about belief in God, essentially what's underneath this is it's belief in God as an opinion as a private opinion is justifiable. That's how this worked out in the modern realm, in the modern political realm. As an opinion is justifiable as a private opinion, but because you can't demonstrate it either rationally or empirically, it's not justifiable in the public space. Now, I know, where's the book? Oh, I put it over there. I'm not going to go get it. You know, when I bring in Alvin Plantinga, Reformed Epistemology, you have this critique of, you have what Plantinga and Waltersdorf did was critique this system of justified beliefs. And you've also got Thomas Reid and Scottish common sense realism in there. So that's also up for debate. But the main project he's getting in with this.
And Kant attempted to reconcile Descartes' rationalism and Hume's skepticism. So Kant argued that we need to make a distinction between what he called the noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm. The noumenal world represents the world as it really is, the world of ideas in Descartes, right? And the phenomenal world represents the world as it exists in our perception, so the world of impressions in Hume. So if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to witness it, did anything happen? Noumenally speaking, yes, it did. Phenomenally speaking, no, it did not. And we only have access to the phenomenal world. But There is a mechanism in our mind called the transcendental, which translates the noumenal realm for us and displays the phenomenal world in our perception like a movie projector, right? To use another metaphor, think of the transcendental operating in your mind, which Kant posits, translates the noumenal to the phenomenal for us. Think of it like a sausage maker. So imagine the noumenal world is the raw material of sausage, and the phenomenal world is the processed, packaged sausage link. Now imagine you go to a grocery store and you read on the label that the sausage is made of the highest quality pork and it's organic. Right? So you try to visit the sausage factory to verify that the sausage is organic and that all the materials are high quality, but they won't let you in for security reasons, for sanitary reasons, right? And that seems understandable to you. Why would they let some rando walk into their sausage factory, right? So you decide, I'm just going to trust the sausage company. Kant argues that we need to take the same posture toward the transcendental. We will never have justified knowledge of the world as it really is. We'll never be able
justified knowledge of the world
to escape our mind. We can never make it to the sausage factory to visit, to verify whether our experience of the world conforms to the actual world. All we have is our experience. And in that sense, Hume's critique of Descartes is correct, since all we have are sense experiences. But we should trust that the transcendental gives to us in the form of the phenomenal world what is practically true, and therefore, while we may not be epistemologically justified in assuming that our claims about the phenomenal world translate to the noumenal, we are practically justified in assuming that the laws of logic can establish common rules of perception that govern everyone's mind and therefore work as common rules which human beings are justified in taking for granted. So Kant likewise attempts,
and you can see us moving over here towards axiology as we move through this process,
to rectify Hume's moral crisis of saying you can't move from is to ought by proposing what he calls the categorical imperative, which is the notion that a moral law is binding if it can be universalized. So, for example, lying or not telling the truth, right, purposely to deceiving other people is categorically wrong, because if everybody lied all the time, there would be no such thing as truth-telling and therefore no such thing as lying. So therefore, lying should be morally wrong, because to universalize it would be to destroy the possibility of the concept itself. Same thing for adultery and murder and even homosexuality. Kantian arguments have been made. And then comes along philosopher Georg Hegel.
Now we're going to hold on to Hegel until a little bit later. So let's keep it here for now. You've got the ancient, the pre-modern, the modern, the postmodern. You've got metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Those are your 6 words that he gives you to sort of orient your understanding of philosophy. And now we can very easily locate Jordan Peterson as a modernist. He is skeptical about metaphysical. He's skeptical about the noumenal realm. He is trying really hard through Piaget and Jung and many others to be able to say justifiable things about metaphysics, but he stops short. He may talk about these things in private, but he's not going to bring them out into the public sphere where science is governing, because that would be inappropriate. He doesn't have knowledge, okay? He doesn't have knowledge of that. Now, we could bring in Dallas Willard. It'd be wonderful if Dallas Willard were alive to have a conversation with Jordan Peterson. That would be one of the conversations I would so love to have, Jordan Peterson and Dallas Willard. But Dallas Willard is no longer here, so we must move on. Then Jordan Peterson goes to Liberty University. And of course, Liberty University is a place where they're not shy about saying, we believe in God. And David Nasser is not shy about inviting Jordan Peterson to believe in God. And Jordan Peterson goes willingly right in there to Liberty University. When Christians start talking God and Christ as God, they start talking metaphysics, and they don't feel embarrassed by it. They don't feel like this is something that's only appropriate in private. This is something for the public sphere. This is something for the public realm. And so some in the modern view say that these Christians are, in fact, anachronistic. They are like dinosaurs, and they're out there in the public sphere talking about God. And you could, when we'd watch the we'd watch these separated magisteria so amazingly portrayed. The tension was just there on stage with Peterson, and you got Gary Habermas, and he's going to do a deal there to get Jordan Peterson to believe in the historicity and the physicality of the resurrection, and maybe Gary Habermas can undo the pressuring that Sam Harris did in their other conversation. So Jordan Peterson says, I live as though God exists. Because why? Because God number one, dismissed after Darwin. We don't need God number one for biology and geology, but Jordan Peterson comes around and says we really do need him for psychology, and we really do need him for ethics. And this metaphorical foundation, he used that word on the Dave Rubin report, this metaphorical foundation is necessary for Western culture. And if we lose that, we lose everything else. But there's something that's haunting us there, because we still have to basically live on top of Hume and Descartes and the uneasy empiricism, rationalism. We must still maintain ourselves upon epistemology. We're skeptical about metaphysics, and we can't go there. So he's an agnostic. He's a pragmatist. Value is self-evident. And when we play the little clip, I'm going to play a little bit of him and Nasser talking. You know, that's the level of certainty that he can have. And we're talking about someone in AA making life better. We'll get there in a minute. That's what we're dealing with. But now, of course, Nasser is a Christian. Christians start with metaphysics. They're ancient people in many ways. They start with metaphysics, and God says, I am, in the book of Exodus. And it's going to be very interesting to hear Jordan Peterson get to the burning bush and get to God naming himself. And maybe I should be there for the Q&A when Jordan Peterson does Exodus, because I'd really love to, because when you see this in terms of metaphysics and epistemology and understand the pre-modern and the modern, you can understand why this stuff takes the shape that it does. But now let's listen to these two talk a little bit, and especially to this preaching to ourself idea.
It's easy to sit on the edge of your bed and to think, look, there are things I'm doing, there are things I'm not doing.
This is Jordan Peterson at prayer. Remember, it was in the Sam Harris conversations. It was in the convocation conversations. This is where, in many ways, Jordan Peterson has this experience of this open experience of God number two. But he's sitting on the edge of his bed. Okay, he's not sitting in a public church. He's on the edge of his bed. This is a private space, and he's having, and so this is Jordan sharing. But this is not science we're doing here. This is exploration.
That I should be doing, that I could and would do. Small things. You don't want to get grandiose, but you can start to improve your life incrementally by eliminating those things that are self-evidently making you bitter and miserable. But you have to decide that that's what you want. You're willing to burn off that dead wood, to sacrifice.
Mortification, burning off that dead wood. We have access to this knowledge. We can make our life better. We have access to meaning. Meaning is, for Jordan Peterson, in a sense, a little internal gyroscope. And when we feel meaning kicking in, this is, within the iron box of secularism, hints of the stars outside, and we should follow that meaning and move towards it.
It's that bitterness and that unhappiness, even though you may feel that you're justified in harboring it. You may even be justified in harboring it, because people have very hard lives and sometimes they're very badly mistreated. But you need to think it's okay if things improve, and it would be worthwhile for me to start to abandon my, well, you could say my sin, my failure to make the mark, right? My failure to take proper aim, but to abandon those things that I'm doing that I know to be harmful to myself.
What would you say to pastors who think, well...
Pastors? Liars like us? And because, well, let's let him talk a little bit more, because we're going to see some of Jordan Peterson's biases with respect to pastors.
Why would you stop short of trying to get them to self-help, or try to get them to, when you could go even further with them? just only deal with the symptoms and those things, but just actually then provide them a faith that.
Well,
Okay, right there. So David Nasser, he's revealing his philosophical system. He is a Christian. He believes with metaphysics. God is more real than I am. And you see, Peterson plays with that, when it comes to Jordan Peterson plays with that when it comes to, the story. Fiction can be more real than the individual, and he plays with those ideas. And part of that is because we don't really have access to a Platonic monarchical vision where we see clearly from above, or we access the forms directly. We essentially approximate it by crowdsourcing a monarchical vision. And so when we see what is real for many people, that in a sense is more real than just what it is for me. But right away you've got the tension between Plato and Aristotle right there again. So you've got this approximated monarchical vision and an Aristotelian real thing down below here, and you're saying, well, which is more real? But now David Nasser is saying, why would you give them the little answer for them when you can give them the whole plate, which is God, the metaphysic, the foundation, the thing upon which we build? But Peterson's going to be skeptical about that, and you're going to hear that. And right away, his skepticism is going to rely on, well, see, Peterson doesn't think the pastor can know this. That's not knowledge. That knowledge is not accessible within the modern frame. We have dismissed metaphysical knowledge, and so the best we can do within the iron box of secularism is try to navigate with our gyroscopes and our approximations of what is better or worse right now. And this is sort of like Sam Harris's A/B testing for good. Is this better than this? Is sobriety better than alcoholism? Yes, good. Well, we know that, so let's work towards that. Is maybe having 2 drinks better than having 8 drinks? Yeah, if you can handle 2 drinks and stop there, that's better than 8 drinks. But now pay attention. Of course, Nasser's got metaphysics down below, and then epistemology, and then axiology. That's his structure. And so David Nasser is going to say, hey, why not give the guy God? And instead of, playing around with sobriety. Sobriety, now we're going to get into a little Augustine, sobriety is whispers of what's outside the box. And Jordan Peterson's always trying to figure out how we can see through the box, how we can navigate by the stars, how we can know these things. But he's still in this box, and, well, and at the end, we're going to ask, well, what is this box constructed of? And why is he afraid to get out of the box?
If you're a pastor, you probably should ask that question. I mean, the issue is...
a little tell there.
In a situation like that is that you have to govern your response to the person in accordance with that person.
Okay, now the individual. Now there's a hierarchy of knowledge that's operating here. So you hear Jordan Peterson's reluctance to get into metaphysics. Let's keep it pragmatic here, because pragmatism is all about, you read the Metaphysical Club and Charles Peirce and statistics, and we might not, our tools aren't accurate enough to really tell us incredibly accurate to give us certain knowledge about the location of the stars, let's say, but via statistics we can get close enough. And so Peterson's pragmatism is at work here, and pastors have lots of biases involved and lots of things, and so let's be a little suspicious about the pastor's motivation. And I'm not doubting that, because I know pastors and I know we lie and we've got all these other motivations. And as my friend once told me, pastors are kingdom builders. They build their own kingdom. So I'm not doubting Jordan Peterson's faith in pastors, let me tell you. But what he's revealing are his philosophical categories.
You have to see where they're willing to go next, and you want to make sure that your destination, which could be, let's say, your pride in your role in their salvation,
Right.
for example.
And David Nasser knows. He's seen plenty of pastors do plenty of bad stuff. And so I've got a world of respect for David Nasser, the tiny little bit that I know about him. He's an honest dude, and he's willing to fess up and break the pastors' union and say, yeah, pastors, you got to watch those critters. They can be really slick.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't interfere with your careful noticing of what it is that they need right here and now.
Knowledge.
And so you want to push people to their limit, but to their genuine limit.
Yes.
You have to have knowledge where their limit is.
Right?
But you don't want to tear the fabric of trust by.
No.
You don't want to tear the fabric of trust. What trust are you talking about? The trust between the pastor and the person you're working with. In all fairness, the same goes for the psychological profession in clinical psychology. You don't want to clinical psychologists, just like pastors, have their own motivations, and because they're all people.
Oh, and you
Right,
and
by
you don't
pushing
want
too
to
hard.
make them into puppets of your desire.
And that's what pastors do, don't they? And they really do.
You can lead people, but you can't.
He really means you shouldn't.
Let's say you can't remake them. Like you can lead them, and to lead someone appropriately,
Shouldn't.
you need to know where they are, and that means you have to pay attention. And I would say,
Pastors don't pay attention.
well, for some people, the religious approach initially might be the right one. There's some evidence for that. For example,
The right one. The right one in terms of what? The right one of achieving what goal? The right one of achieving sobriety, escape from alcoholism. So Peterson, as a good modernist, says religion can work towards the goal of going from alcohol, from ruinous alcoholism to sobriety. Okay?
for example, in the treatment of alcoholism. I mean, the alcoholism literature indicates quite clearly that perhaps the only effective known treatment for alcoholism is actually religious conversion. I mean, sometimes people stop of their own accord, and we don't exactly understand why, but religious conversion actually seems to be quite effective, and it isn't clear why. The 12-step people capitalize on that, and there hasn't been good scientific studies of the effectiveness of the 12-step program because it's hard to do controlled studies. But
because I think I sat with a gentleman one time who is a 12-step program guru. He travels the world. So he said, hey, what are you doing? And I told him I travel and speak. And he said, oh, I travel and speak. And he said, what are you going to? And I said, I'm going to this church and I'm, going to go preach. And he said, oh, I'm going to a rally, an Alcoholics Anonymous rally. And he pulled out his coin and he said, I've been sober. And he gave me the days. It was a long time. And he said, and I said, well, how do you begin? He asked me, I'm sorry, he said, how do you begin? I said, I always begin with the word. I always open up the Bible to make sure I'm not, that's the foundation of anything I have to say.
Okay. So now we've got some foundationalism going here too. And so let's have him say a little bit more.
People ultimately don't need my opinion. They need the truth. And he said, I always begin with the same, because it's interesting. He said, I always begin with, hi, my name is, and I am an alcoholic. He said, because we believe once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic.
Right. Okay. Now, we're dealing again with beliefs. And these beliefs have to do with that which is most true. And so you've got David Nasser beginning with his Bible and saying, well, here's my Bible. That's true. And you've got the alcoholic saying, well, now we're going to start playing with identity statements. And Nasser's going to go into that in a minute. The alcoholic begins with an identity statement and says, well, and AA is sort of famous for hovering above the metaphysics and staying in the axiology, staying in the practicality of the should of getting free of alcohol, and says, well, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you say you believe, remember Jordan Peterson saying, well, people say they believe things. They don't really believe those things because they don't act them out, which is a great point, which actually the Bible makes that point too. But they say they believe something, and what they say they believe really isn't connected to what they actually believe. So there's sort of a hidden knowledge that they're disconnected from themselves. And so, well, how do you begin? Well, we're going to begin with identity. And so the speaker for AA says, I am an alcoholic. That's my identity. And I have to stay away from alcohol. He begins with the truth. Now, David Nasser, with his form of biblicism, also begins with the truth. And says, well, I start with the word. I don't believe with me, so I start with a word. So you've got these two systems working right there. Now watch how Nasser begins to leverage identity, because in a sense, with skepticism about metaphysics, people don't even know the word epistemology. They're just acting, let's call it naive realism. They're just living what they are. But they're going to start with something, and in a rather Descartes move, I am what? I am an alcoholic, or I am a Christian. And I'm going to build on that identity, and I'm going to go from there.
Right.
And I said, you haven't taken a drink in 1,100 days or whatever.
Yeah.
He said, yeah. He said, I teach people. He said, but we believe one. I said, that's the difference for us. We as believers believe, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was Saul, but now I'm Paul.
A transformational identity, okay? So keep that word in mind when we get to Vervaeke. There's something transformative has happened, and Jordan Peterson has said, yeah, this transformation that can release people from alcohol. But they're both identity, and one will say, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I am a Christian. I am a child of the King. I am a servant of Jesus. I am a believer. Identity. Do I believe? See, and this is where the belief, do I believe in God? I'm not interested in joining a club, any club. What, did you join the IDW? It's kind of a club. Did you join the staff of the University of Toronto? It's kind of a club. But you're not interested in joining a Christian club. But identity. I am an alcoholic, therefore this. I am a Christian, therefore this. And David's going to work that out a little bit here.
I once was an alcoholic, but now I have a new identity. So are we just preaching to ourselves?
Does this, now what, are we just preaching to ourselves? I love Nasser. I should really love this video. He's just opening the door saying, here you go, Jordan. Is there something to this? Now, you're skeptical about metaphysics. And so you're beginning with epistemology, just like Paul Maxwell ran through it so beautifully. Can we go like this? Can we start with identity and build up from there?
Please be just very honest with me. Are we just
lathering
it up and preaching that to ourselves? Because we've
lathering it up and preaching it to ourselves. What does he mean by that? Are we deluding ourselves? Do we have Dumbo's feather here? Are we standing in the mirror and saying, I'm handsome, I have long flowing hair, and people like me? Is that what we're doing here? Jordan, tell us.
You've seen the evidence of saying to someone, when Christ gives you a new identity, you're no longer a slave to the things that you were a slave to. You're now a slave to righteousness.
Now, what are we using here? It's an assertion, and we're also using a story. We're using a story about, and one of my good friends, preacher over the Folsom church plant that we have, and actually his buddy who's now chaplain at Wheaton, says, you can tell the Christian story in two things. You have identity and you have narrative. And between those two things, you can pretty much get most of what you're looking for. There's identity and there's narrative. So here's the identity, and I am a Christian, and there's I was lost, but now I'm found. There's narrative, a narrative of transformation, and that narrative is built within a much bigger narrative. And again, this is all built upon a metaphysic. This is ancient, pre-modern approach.
Now, growing in that identity doesn't mean there's not a struggle, doesn't mean there's not temptation that you can fall into, and understand your weak points.
Well, I think it's more of a cautionary technique on the part of the 12-step people.
Now Peterson is going to critique this a little bit, and it's kind of a sidebar, but we're used to that with Jordan. We're going to come back to it.
They assume that alcohol, especially for people who are really susceptible to alcoholism, is sufficiently powerful.
But notice he isn't answering the question, which is, are we just preaching to ourselves? Is this Dumbo's feather? Is this woo?
So that some people can't risk any relapse. And I think that's true with alcohol. It's a very dangerous drug, and I think that is true for a minority of people. There are studies of alcoholic recovery in the alcoholism treatment literature, and I haven't looked at that literature for a long time. Arguments still hadn't been settled, but it's quite clear that for some people, alcohol is so dangerous that it's safer for them to assume that they don't have the wherewithal to make a single error. But remember, they're talking about something that's a fairly focal part of their life, right? They say, well, I have this one overwhelming temptation and I have to treat it with tremendous respect. Your question is more about personality transformation in general, and
how it plays out even into the trenches of addictions. I mean, I'm a Christian. I became a Christian.
See, now he's not shy about it. I'm a Christian. This is my identity.
When I was 18, my addictions didn't stop, tempting me, and it's not just even the things that I had before I became a Christian. I've added new temptations as a believer. Trust me, they don't.
Yeah, I love an honest pastor.
Go away, but rather than tapping into self-power or tapping into even good things like the accountability of a community and those kind of things.
Now again, watch, he's setting up a hierarchy rather than tapping into accountability, community, all of these things that are here. He's got a hierarchy, and the hierarchy, there's something bigger than that.
For me, it's so inside out. I just have to continue to preach to myself.
Well, it's a funny
I'm
issue,
acting in contradiction to my new identity when I succumb to it.
Okay, so there you have. So the technique here is there's an identity and consistency with that identity. And this gets Peterson's interest.
I do succumb to it sometimes, but when I do, I have to tell myself, I just acted in contradiction to my new identity, not as a complement to my new identity.
And Peterson's interested now. And my biggest frustration with this entire talk was, and this is always a temptation, and I fall into it all the time, and you can find me doing it on lots of conversations, and I can even tell you which ones I really regret when I should have listened, because you could see the person there. You as a pastor now, you've got them on the scent, you've got them on the trail. Don't interrupt their process.
As a Christian, I mean, you're called upon ethically to act in a Christian manner.
Yes, sir.
And so there's obviously some assumption that your voluntary actions are part and parcel of an ethical requirement and also part and parcel of the faith. But then there's also the correlated claim that the salvation is through Christ. And so there's a funny contradiction there that's difficult to reconcile, which is that on the one hand, it's the action of something transcendent that's leading you out of perdition.
It's the action of God number 2, something transcendent. And so now he's really got Peterson's interest, because this is a big question for Peterson. And it's a big question because of metaphysics. Because the question, God number 2, is, Peterson has nicely established God number 1 and the need for God number 1 in terms of psychology. But God number 2 who reaches out. And it's really interesting in the AA conversation, because what's the step? I am not in control of myself, and I need to turn myself over to a greater power, a power greater than myself, because my alcohol has made my life unmanageable. See, God number 2 is built into AA. And it's not far from Peterson sitting on the edge of his bed. It's because you're sitting on the edge of your bed, or there's been your life has become a mess, and you're going to an AA meeting, and someone's going to say, you need to turn your life over to a power greater than yourself. Yeah, no wonder it's been a gateway drug to Christianity, because you're basically saying there's that Christian moment, and Peterson's like, well, there's this Christian thing where is it me who stops drinking, or is it this higher power that I turn my life over, and that then leads me to sobriety? But if I is it a psychological trick? Am I preaching to myself? I don't know. There's a barrier there, and we're gonna get over to Roger Scruton in a little while. But before we get there, I want us to pause here about this movement and this trick and this turning, because what's going on there? So let's leave these two, and let's go to John Vervaeke. His latest video that came out last Friday, I think it was number 13, he's talking about secularism in Buddhism, which is really helpful, because Vervaeke, again, some of you are like, well, I don't want to listen to Vervaeke because of the Buddhism stuff. Well, okay. But Vervaeke understand his major project, which is that broadly in our society we are having a meaning crisis. And this meaning crisis is because the axial age religions are no longer available, are no longer, I would say, justifiable to modern people. And again, all that stuff going on with this justifiable word, which we're really going to go after. It's no longer justifiable to believe in these axial age religions. And it's no longer justifiable because, well, someone's going to have to explain that to me at some point, because I don't see it. But it's no longer justifiable. And so people are out there and they're having this meaning crisis. They're being sucked into nihilism, and we need help. And so what John Vervaeke's project is doing is saying, can we, via cognitive science, justify? See, so this is what's so interesting about Vervaeke's project, because it's very similar to Peterson's project. They're okay. Metaphysics, no, it's off the table. We're skeptical about that. We close that door in the Enlightenment. And Sam Harris, John Vervaeke, and Jordan Peterson, in a sense, so say we all. And Steven Pinker too. So now we're going to start with epistemology, and we're going to try and get up there. We're going to try and get to a place that now Peterson in public just wants to save Western civilization and keep back the bloody postmodern neo-Marxists. And the Christian, the private stuff about belief, well, that's the biblical series. That's over here on the side. All right. He really wants to do it, and he likes doing it, and it's really cool, but that's over here. And if he can build his tower, if he can get all the way up past the you can get through that separation, wow, you really got something, right? That's the Tower of Babel. John is also a psychologist, and John is saying, well, we got this meaning crisis, and we got to help people with this meaning crisis. And so they're both kind of working on the same thing, but John isn't going anywhere near this political stuff. And I'm with John in that, because you come to my meetup and you start using the meetup as a place to promote your politics, people are going to say, nah, we don't want to do that. We want to talk about bigger stuff. So John is kind of part of a group that is very popular in Sacramento, kind of secular people who have found the wisdom of Buddhism helpful in terms of giving them more of a life they want to live. And that's John's project. And so John is following some people like this. I've never heard of this guy. I'm just learning about him through John's work. Stephen Batchelor, After Buddhism. And when I heard that, I thought, boy, this is I've heard a lot of this stuff in mainline podcasts, and including some stuff coming out of the CBC. Canada, quite frankly, does some really good stuff on their public television and radio. And After Theism was a CBC radio thing that I listened to, and it was very, very interesting. But that was a number of years ago. I think I've still got it probably on a hard drive someplace. And so now John is going to talk about, back to where we started with this, John is going to talk about beliefs in Buddhism. Is Buddhism about these beliefs that we have? And John's going to say no. And I really like some of the moves that John makes as he's working through this. So let's let John do his thing now.
And so from his works and in discussion with him, he argues that the West is still in the grip of a problematic way of trying to interpret Buddhism. So let's take a quick look at that, and then we will return to what the central claims of Buddhism are. And I want to show you why even that way of putting it is perhaps incorrect. So Batchelor, in one of his books, along with others, and he follows it up with Buddhism Without Beliefs, and then later on this is followed up by even a more radical After Buddhism, in which he's taking the position of somebody who's post-religious, very germane to many of us. But he does argue, and along with others,
very germane to many of us. Now, again, if you listen to Dallas Willard's Veritas Forum, Dallas is dead on right. That little comment that John made, it's identity, okay? This is common to many of us. But these are the worldview shaping sidebars that very much deal with status. You're not a flat earther, are you? You're not a Republican, are you? You didn't vote for Obama, did you? You don't listen to Jordan Peterson, do you? And I'm not saying anything about that little statement that John made. He didn't mean that. There's nothing inappropriate about that statement. But remember, we are riders and elephants, and as the elephants are always listening to these status things. And to John's credit, I mean, John has been very interested in engaging with me, and he said wonderful things about myself and Jonathan Peugeot, and even though we might not agree on everything, and this is very modern, very Western, we want to continue to collaborate and work together towards truth and towards knowledge and towards learning from each other across these tribes that divide us. And I'm totally with him. But again, these little side comments are how we, and this happens in churches all the time. I mean, churches are full of this stuff. Well, it might be in a church that you didn't vote for Obama, did you? Or you didn't vote for Trump, did you? I mean, it's all these little status things that the elephants are always watching.
Others, that we face an interpretation crisis when we're trying to understand Buddhism. We have two approaches that people give us for how we should try and interpret Buddhism. Of course, this will not be relevant just to Buddhism, but for any position that exists in a different culture or history that we're trying to understand, be it Buddhism or Stoicism
or Christianity too. Because what he's about to lay out, I forget the guy's name. It was one of the great series things on the Reformation. Is Christianity a statement of doctrines that we assent to and say we believe in, or is Christianity something else? And it was popular about 15, 20 years ago to say Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship. And that was a way of wanting to it's a really telling statement made by Christians in terms of what was going on in terms of status and belief systems, especially with respect to the skepticism surrounding metaphysics, okay? Because, well, we can't agree on what the Bible says or whether the Bible is true. And publicly, we keep the Bible over here in the private sphere. We don't let it into the public sphere. That's the secular move. And this has been very important for America. And in fact, religion has flourished in America because of that move, and that move has been very helpful. And I frankly have never had a problem with there not being prayer in public schools, because I'm not really so sure I want my teachers praying, because I have no idea who they are. Now, if you're teaching at a Christian school, the Christian school has you sign a statement of belief, and they actually govern your beliefs. But again, where we started this video, Jordan Peterson, and do you believe in God? I'm not so sure this whole belief talk has much validity. That's essentially what he's saying. I don't think he really believes that, because I'm not sure he acts as if none of that belief talk has validity. That's where I'm going with this, because we have the identity talk with him and Nasser. And now I think John Vervaeke is going to do a nice job of let's dig into this belief talk a little bit more. And should we throw this out? And we'll get to some of that, but he might bring some of it back in. We might find that we can't really deal with each other without this belief talk. We might find that we threw out this belief talk because of our skepticism about metaphysics, but we can't stop doing it. We keep labeling each other's with these beliefs talk, and we keep navigating our lives with this belief talk.
Platonism, for example. So he says we are confronted with two different positions. One is the claim that you can only interpret Buddhism from within a tradition, and we've seen good reason why you might argue that this is, right, the kind of stuff we're talking about here, wisdom and self-transcendence. This is not largely a matter of altering your belief. This is about going through transformation in your perspectival and participatory knowing. It's about fundamentally altering the agent-arena relationship, your existential modes, etc.
In other words, don't knock it till you've tried it. And Christians make this move all the time, because they say, the Holy Spirit has changed me from the inside, therefore I have this degree of knowledge that you can't touch, because I see it from the inside. Okay? You hear this at the hoax guys, the hoax paper guys have noted this in terms of some critical theory talk that, white guy, you don't really know what racism is because you don't know what it's like to be black. Or man, you don't know what woman is because you don't know what it's like to be a woman. It's this, you don't criticize Buddhism unless you've been a Buddhist. Don't criticize Christianity unless you've been a Christian and been renewed by the Holy Spirit.
And so if you are not engaged within the transformative practice, then, of course, you do not understand what Buddhism is. It has to, in that sense, be understood from within. And this is a general property of wisdom per se. Wisdom is something that must be understood from within. The problem with that, of course, is it's myopic, right? There are very many Buddhist traditions, and they are relative to certain times and place in particular historical contexts.
Now, what he's noting here with Buddhism, as with Christianity, is there's a pluralism problem. That, so not only is that true of Buddhism in general, but unless you're a Reformed Christian, you don't really understand the beauty of tulip. Unless you're a Pentecostal, you don't really understand the beauty of the second blessing, and on and on and on and on and on. And so there's a knowledge problem in this, that there's kind of a Gnostic knowledge problem in this.
And to claim that particular interpretation, a particular sect or tradition is the sole pathway to understanding or interpreting Buddhism.
And this rates against, this irritates our democratic values, that, one of the things that democratic, everything should be accessible to all, okay? And so we're suspicious about this private knowledge.
Is, of course, myopic. It's narrow-minded and often parochial, it claims things as fundamental which are often very contingent. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is, well, what the alternative says is, the problem with this is very subjective. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but the idea here is, right, this is, the problem with seeing things from the inside is that tends to be very subjective, and of course that means you're not understanding the phenomena as is, but you're only seeing it through your own particular bias. So the alternative, outside any tradition, and this is typified in the academic study of Buddhism, for example, like within religious studies or something like that. And then the main argument here is, and this will often happen, it's not always the case, but if you meet people in religious studies and you'll say, are you studying Buddhism? And they'll say, yes, I'm studying Buddhism. And then you'll ask them, well, what practices do you engage in? And they'll say, oh, no, I don't engage in any practices. That would be a mistake. If I got too involved, too close to this material, I would lose my objectivity. I would lose my ability to critically reflect on it.
I have to maintain my monarchical vision of this. I have to see it all from a distance, but I have to be unmoved and unmovable by it, and that then affords this other kind of knowledge. Well, what's that other kind of knowledge?
Critically compare it to other traditions, other approaches. So the idea here is what we will have, right, is an objective account. Now, although Stephen doesn't mention this in his book, Batchelor, Stephen Batchelor doesn't mention it in his book, this is very reminiscent of the problem that Socrates faced. Because what we have here is transformative relevance, and here we have some attempt to get at the truth. And like the Socratic project, I would put it to you, and this is what I think Batchelor is saying, is that Buddhism is about both of these. It's about trying to find transformatively relevant truths.
Something hasn't split yet.
But that means we have to transcend both of these ways of interpreting Buddhism. So
we have to transcend it. We have to transcend something that in many ways wasn't divided, but has been divided. And this is a common thing throughout history, which we're going to get into a little bit when we start mentioning the name of Owen Barfield.
He points out that we have to get beyond both of these in some fashion.
That's going to be
How
hard.
do we do this? Well, he points out that we need to do this in a way that is going to be relevant to issues of meaning in our life. So this interpretation crisis, where we have these two competing and diametrically opposed ways of trying to interpret and import Buddhism, is actually interacting with the meaning crisis in society. Because we're not doing this just in some empty cultural vacuum. We are precisely interested, as I've been suggesting throughout this series of lectures, we're doing this precisely because we're deeply involved with the project of trying to recover how we can cultivate wisdom and enhance meaning in our lives in a cultural historical context that is not supportive and is, in fact, often deleterious to those existentially necessary endeavors.
Right there, this dual thing, how it connects with the meaning crisis, connects up with Jordan Peterson's coyness about the answer about his belief in God. You've got the subjective, well, that's private. You've got the objective, well, I'm going to stay over there with respect to truth. But the integration is obviously what you need to address meaning. And so Peterson, well, this has, again, been the standard, the naked public square has been the standard posture of the West since the great American experiment of secularity, at least with respect to the federal government, and then the states followed. And again, I'm not criticizing freedom of religion here, so don't think I'm a theonomist. Most of you don't know what that name is, so don't worry about it, but I'm not a theonomist. These two are split. And in a sense, the game we started playing was that, well, there's public truth, and so that's what I'm going to be in public, scientific, objective. And then there's subjective, private experience of religion. And so Jordan Peterson, when asked, well, do you believe in God? Might have just asked him about, other private things like how much money he's making, or sex life with his wife, or whether, we know he doesn't drink himself to sleep at night because he can't drink alcohol because he's only eating beef and water. I shouldn't laugh. It's just, I don't know. But there we are. That's split there. And Vervaeke is dead on right. The meaning crisis is revolving around this. So now Stephen Batchelor is going to want to address this by dealing with this question of belief.
Okay, so what do? We have to break out of all of this in some fashion. And what he does is he tries to see where these are both fixated. And what he argues is that this will become myopic because it will get fixated on the particular propositions of a tradition. It will get fixated on beliefs. And this is, in fact, what you study over here objectively. You study, of course, the texts and the beliefs that have been propositionally rendered by a particular tradition.
So in other words, they both, what happens, okay, so you got your Pentecostals and your Reformed people, and well, you Reformed people really don't know what the second blessing is like, and the Reformed people say to the Pentecostals, you really don't know what the assurance of salvation built on a solid foundation is like. And then of course the Vineyard and John Wimber folks come again and say, you can be both. Come on, you can be Reformed Pentecostal, and but we're not going to go into the second blessing thing. We'll be charismatic, not on and on and on and on and on. So. And what you find is that they start arguing about beliefs. They start arguing about their doctrine and their dogma. And, of course, America has had plenty of experience with this and doesn't really like all the conflict. And so, I'm not going to go there. And plus, you have the fact that your metaphysics, which for the Christians is the foundational layer, where we started out this video with Paul Maxwell, we're skeptical about that. And so all of this religious dogma, as we saw all the fights between the confessional tribes and the breaking away of the Protestant Reformation, none of that led to anything. And so I'm just going to stick over here with my subjective experience, and I'm going to leave truth over there. But what access do the objectivists have with respect to the subjectivists? Well, it's their beliefs, because that's what they're always fighting about. And so that must really be what these religions are about. They're all about the beliefs.
It's this belief fixation that needs to be broken through. This is why he entitles the book that came after Alone with Others, Buddhism Without Beliefs, because he tries to argue that part of what is preventing us from really getting both sides of Buddhism is that both of these are fixed, locked, like being locked inside the box in the 9-dot problem, on trying to understand Buddhism as a set of beliefs.
Now, this, of course, was moved on before with the whole spiritual but not religious movement, because, well, we can get away from beliefs if we just focus it on Schleiermacher, this experience of dependence. If we can make it completely subjective, we can get away from beliefs. And a lot went into the New Age movement towards this, but you just keep bumping into beliefs and they keep coming up, and because beliefs are a very easy way to begin to frame all of this stuff, and right there when we start, let's say, making the identity move, well, there they are.
we have gotten so used to this way of thinking, and we'll see later why it is a post-Christian way of thinking, that these traditions for these axial legacy traditions for cultivating wisdom and self-transcendence are to be understood as creeds, as systems of beliefs that we now even will equate, right, the word belief with these practices. We'll talk about it as a belief system, or we'll even use the word belief as a synonym for faith, etc. So we have gotten so oriented towards this reduction of all of what we've been talking about here, all of this transformational process to the possession and the assertion of beliefs, and again, we'll see historically why that's the case, that we can't break out of this. Interestingly, although I won't be able to do it in this video, we're going to see that breaking out of, right, trying to understand meaning in terms of belief systems is also going to be needed to address the meaning crisis.
Now, here's the thing you're going to deal with when you're dealing with these beliefs. You're going to bump into metaphysical claims. It's going to happen. And that's part of the point of this video. Now I'm looking at the clock and I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking I'm going to have to break this up into 2 videos. And I always hate doing that, but I'm going to have to because I just don't have time to sit here and do this. And if I just stop the video and have one monstrous 3 or 4 hour video, well, that's probably not going to work. So I am going to have to break this up because when I'm thinking about all the other stuff I want to bring in here, it's all in there. But this is where Vervaeke and Maxwell I'm putting together, because what we're doing is being haunted by metaphysics, in that at some point you can't help but make metaphysical claims or smuggle them in or rely on metaphysical assertions. We're not going to get away from that. And that's where all of this goes.
I have been pointing you towards that repeatedly. Belief systems, namely ideologies, are attempts to create meaning, but they fail for the deep reason, and you've already seen a lot of argument and evidence for this, is that a lot of your meaning-making machinery is not occurring at the level of your propositional knowledge, your beliefs and your assertions of which beliefs you adhere to.
Now, right there, I'm going to play that again because it's really important. And at some point when John and I talk, this is probably where our conversation is going to go.
Occurring at the level is that a lot of your meaning-making machinery is not occurring at the level of your propositional knowledge, your beliefs and your assertions of which beliefs you adhere to.
That gets into the disconnect that Peterson notes, that you act out your true beliefs instead of the beliefs that you are. And there's cognitive reasons for that. And that's that this is our separation from ourselves. And this is what the Apostle Paul talks about in Romans 7. The good I would do, I don't do. And what I don't want to do, I do. And I need, well, he's going to assert, I need rescue. The alcoholic makes this move. That the good I would do, I don't do. And the stuff I want to do, I can't stop but doing. And so something needs to happen. And it's there are reasons why we're in this mess we're in with respect to, well, I believe I'm, whether it's someone trying to get sober, whether it's a Christian trying to live by their moral system. And of course, where Peterson and Nasser ended, or where I ended them, was right there where Peterson's, well, what is it? Is it this God? Now, right away, God number 2, this real God, this interventionist that comes and delivers the alcoholic from the thing greater than themselves that they need to be delivered from? What is it? Well, can you get there? Is there something there? I mean, this, of course, is the big question. Now, Let's see, I'm at 1336. Maybe this is a good place to leave a cliffhanger. New thing for me. Because I'm running out of time, and it's just the way schedules go and these videos go sometimes. So as I'm thinking about it, I've got Tim Keller lined up, I've got Kevin DeYoung lined up, and I'm gonna bring in Maxwell to finish his video, and I've got Roger Scruton lined up and Cambridge University lined up. I got all this stuff to do, and I just can't get it done in an hour. So I'm going to pause right here because I really want to have, I think it's really helpful what Vervaeke is doing and the language he's giving to, and I really like what he does with the first noble truth. And, well, what is that suffering? And then we're going to have to bring in Owen Barfield. So, and C.S. Lewis comes in too. So, yeah, I'm going to pause it here. This is a good place to stop. So I'll probably post this afternoon after it's done rendering. And there's the cliffhanger. Ta-da!